In a photo, a blonde French woman was sitting there surrounded by 4 officers, exuding romance in the air. The German officer beside her nestled in her arms with a smile. They looked like a couple in love. In 1940, Germany attacked France. After Dunkirk evacuation, the French government announced its surrender, and France was occupied by Germany for 4 years. In order to satisfy the physical need of the soldiers, the German army established many brothels in the occupied areas. Each brothel was staffed with 5 to 20 prostitutes. They were mainly used by German officers and soldiers for their sexual pleasure. The woman in the photo is from these brothels. Before the war, like other French girls, she was beautiful and full of romantic fantasies. But the war destroyed everything, and a large number of captured French soldiers was put into concentration camps. Women who had no food to eat and had no home to return to had to sell their charm and bodies to serve German officers to get a piece of bread or a few francs. But some French women, unwilling to endure humiliation, left their families and joined the war to defend their country. Simone Seguin is one of them. She was 18 years old when Nazis occupied France. She joined an armed group led by French communists to be a fighter, risking imprisonment in concentration camp to provide information to her comrades on breaking through German attacks. Her story became well known after journalists stumbled upon it and published it in Life magazine. In 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy, followed by the liberation of France. Along with the jubilation of victory, a campaign to liquidate collaborators was launched in France. The French women who had served the German army became the targets. Their hair was shaved, their faces were covered with paint or lipstick, and they were forced to pray naked. They were humiliated by the enemy when their country was lost, and again by the patriots of their old country when it was restored. Women who participated in the resistance movement were forgotten. They gave their blood to the anti-fascist war but didn't receive the honor they deserved. Some were known to the world by few photos left, but many others turned into dust of history silently. For women, some had to take off their clothes to live, some picked up guns to die for the country. They made their choice for forced or voluntary, but all became victims of war. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War broke out. The Korean Peninsula was filled with the smoke of war, and a large number of young men were drafted and sent to the front. The war has taken away homes, land, and men, and the Korean women were left alone to support their families. As the war heated up, the tug of the war between two sides shifted their identities back and forth. In order to survive, they had to join different camps and participate in various activities to get food and avoid harassment. Worse, after the war, even if they were lucky enough to survive, they faced purges and trials and were even shot as spies. A chaotic time witnessed a chaotic war with a chaotic ending. No one in this war had the opportunity to choose their ideology and their lives. They were swallowed up by the age. Unlike women who stayed in Korea, those who fled from their homeland suffered in different ways. Kim is one of them. On her way to escape, she was unfortunately separated from her husband and son. To protect her daughter was still breastfeeding, she squeezed on a tray and went to the south. She didn't see them again until 68 years later. In July 1953, an armistice agreement was signed by North Korea, China, and the United States, while the South Korea refused to sign. However, the armistice agreement was by no means a peace agreement. So theoretically, the North and South Korea are still at war today. The invisible 38th parallel separates them. Due to diversion of the country, those refugees who survived the war were unable to return to their hometown. According to South Korea's Unification Ministry, there were about 1.23 million refugees from North Korea who were displaced in South Korea during the war. Many of them didn't make it to the day of reunion for mental breakdowns or death in pity. Lee Kyum, one of those trapped in South Korea by the 38th parallel, hasn't yet given up her search for relatives. In 2000, two Koreas took the joint declaration as an opportunity to hold reunions for the families of those who had lost touch with each other and these people finally had their only chance to meet with their loved ones. As the situation fluctuating, reunions can't be held on a sustainable basis. In 2018, the 21st reunion of separated families was held after inter-Korean relations warmed up. According to requirements, they could only meet 6 times and spend a total of 11 hours together over a 6-day period. Nearly 57,000 South Koreans registered, but only 89 attended, and Lee Kyung was lucky enough to be one of them. At that time, she was 92 years old and her son was 71. Both of them were gray-haired. After 68 years, when they met again, hardly could they remember how they used to be. They hugged each other with tears. They cherished this opportunity very much because it might be the last time they see each other in this life. For the Korean women, the war was a painful wound to the both and a one that hasn't healed. The photo is from 1938. Japanese troops invaded He County, Anhui Province, and Cheng Benhua, a 24-year-old female soldier, was captured unfortunately. Before she died, facing the camera instead of fear, she crossed her arms over her chest with a contemptuous smile on her face. She had a faith that China would win. This is the only picture of her. She was then bayoneted through the chest by the 4 Japanese soldiers behind her. During the war against Japan, Chinese women were the most tragic victims of the Japanese army's abuse and oppression. But there were many women like Cheng who were unwilling to endure humiliation produced behind the battlefield, rescue the dead and wounded, and they went to the battlefield in order to drive the invaders out. Before the war, these Chinese women could have been teachers, peasants' women, or prostitutes. But when the country was at stake, they fought for their dignity and the survival of the country. The Flowers of War tells the story of 13 prostitutes who endured the ravages of the Japanese army in place of schoolgirls after the fall of Nanjing. The film is based on Yan Geling's novel of the same name, which is inspired by the true story of Minnie Walchen's diary. In 1937, the Japanese army invaded Nanjing and the city was in flames. Japanese soldiers entered homes to search and rape women. The Jinling Women's College of Arts and Sciences became a refugee shelter for women and children, and thousands of homeless people flocked to it for shelter and food. On Christmas Eve, the south and east of the city were on fire, and the killing and pillaging by Japanese continued. They arrived at the shelter, which was a neutral zone, ignored objections of mineral watering. The head of the faculty and made an inhumane demand to select 100 prostitutes out of 10,000 women. After a series of negotiations, the Japanese finally chose 21 beautiful young women. They are the prototypes of 13 flowers. When they were chosen, they knew very well what they were going to face, but they got on Japanese soldiers' truck anyway because they knew that it would protect the remaining 10,000 compatriots. Their story is briefly described in Walchen's diary, and no one knows their end. The sacrifice of war is not only made on the battlefield and not only by men, but also by women, who are mothers, daughters, teachers, and prostitutes. They're all heroines. There should be more stories about them that we should have known. Women and war are roses, thickening the tragic atmosphere of war. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoy it.